There we go. Okay. My mic had turned itself off for God knows what reason. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Snakening, as we cover the ongoing efforts of the Western media to throw Ukraine under the bus and otherwise absolve them of any responsibility for the disaster that they helped to create. And today we have probably one of the most snakening articles I've had to cover so far. I haven't read through all of it. I skimmed it, and this one's going to be a doozy. It is like when I do these titles, these things sometimes, like I go, am I exaggerating a bit about the whole Ukraine cinematic universe? And then stuff like this comes out, and it's just like, I'm going to do a little spoiler. I nominated myself for Best Take in the Argent Awards, a.k.a. the RGS. And we'll see. I might win. It's normal. It's an honor just to be nominated. Or rather, a dishonor in most cases. The Argent Award nominees are pretty much done. I might tweak them a bit. I was going to do it tomorrow, but I kind of want to try to put something a little bit better together. Here's a little preview. This is the In Loving Memory of Prigozhin, Best in Hell and in Our Hearts, Goodbye Wagner's Rose. I might try to sing a little. Goodbye Wagner's Rose, though we hardly knew you at all, or something like that. We'll see. And then I've also been working on some other stuff. We got the King of Cringe. We'll see who's going to win that one. It is a stiff competition for a lot of these. A lot of these are going to be like a gnat swing. Like Worst Take was really hard. Biggest L was really difficult. So we'll see how it goes. But the RGs are going to come up on next week. Okay, co-host the RGs. Okay, no, I don't think anyone is going to co-host, so it's going. I'm getting it ready. I know it's just a PowerPoint, but I'm effort posting on this one. I'm trying to put together a decent award show, because frankly, I just find the whole concept really funny. I will say this, it is somewhat inspired by the Golden Guns. I will admit to that, but this is geopolitical. I've tried to, with the exception of Andrew Tate, who's nominated in a couple categories in Coach Red Pill, I don't think I have any internet stuff. A lot of people wanted me to put the Fuentes take that Alex Jones and Tucker Carlson are liberals. I don't necessarily disagree with the take, but I just, that's an internet thing, and I kind of wanted to leave that out. Like if I wanted to find base stuff on the internet, I can find it anywhere. So, sorry that this looks like shit. Whenever I'm trying to get stuff behind a paywall, it often just doesn't come out very well. So people ask me to try. I will try to read this. I reserve the right to use the text-to-speech if my voice is getting tired. So the article is called "No One Wants to Talk About Ukraine Anymore." And we're going to get this respected journalist, Lionel Shriver, who I think is like some anti-woke liberal or something like that, is going to tell us how the Ukraine cinematic universe is boring. It's like the MCU. It's just so passé. We need a new franchise. I just can't be bothered to care anymore. So, let us get into this. Hat tip to Alexander Mercouris for referencing this in his show today. Apologies for this seasonal downer. Had the website such a listing, this column would surely soar to number one in the Spectator's least popular roster. For just now, few topics are a bigger turnoff than Ukraine. I don't know why I'm doing that voice. It's just very catty. It's very like, sorry, not sorry. I don't care about the Ukraine war anymore. Don't go there, girlfriend. Okay, I'm sorry if my doing that is going to creep people out. But Okay, I'm just sharing this link on other sites. Following Russia's invasion, I got caught up in the same waves of emotion that watched over most Western publics, and I say that with no regret. After relentlessly battling the prevailing cultural winds these past few years, I was relieved to feel a sense of solidarity for once. I can do it in that voice if people want. This is from the Spectator, by the way. This is this is an extremely prestigious British magazine. I think it's very old. Let me see how old it is. It was first published in 1812 or 1828. So supposedly this is conservative. I don't know. Most of us were revulsed by the gratuitous aggression, allied with an underdog whose bite proved surprisingly fierce, thrilled by a former comedian's unexpected rise to his nation's occasion, and consumed by weirdly addictive loathing for Vladimir Putin. Kiev's repelling Russia's clumsy invasion of the capital was exulting. Shouldn't it be Kiev's repelling of? Maybe, I don't know. Was exulting. Like so many of you in these early months, I read about Ukraine every day. I don't anymore. I bet most of you don't either. Joke's on you. I read about it. I listen to it stuff every day to make this show, The Snakening. Ironically enough, I am reading this articles like this on a daily basis so I can shit on you for being a snake. Let's see here. I bet why as grotesque as October 7th was, I sensed in our collective pivot to the Middle East this fall an odd undercurrent of gladness that this is kind of pretentiously written, that now we could plunge up to the neck in a different story. Kind of like, I can't say that on YouTube. It was something involving balls and his wife's lover. Ukraine suddenly seemed yesterday's news, background news, but for Ukrainians, their war is still rolling very much in the present and is being conducted anywhere but in the background. I'm no foreign policy wonk, but I do know something about stories. And observers of international news constitute an audience, a readership. From the off, this story had a spectacular opening chapter, a classic hero personified by Volodymyr Zelensky, but more crucially, the Ukrainian people in as wicked a villain as Shakespeare could have contrived. I mean, I don't think, do we know if Putin's killed anyone personally? I mean, maybe he did back when he was like a leader of the, when he was in the KGB. But let's see here. To begin with, our tale was punctuated by riveting, dramatic events. There's just all these unnecessary adjectives. The outrageous slaughter of civilians in Bucha. I'm going to file that under shit that didn't... maybe that happened. I don't remember that. The triumphant sinking in the Black Sea of Russia's grand warship, the Moskva. Okay, let's see how big the Moskva was. I think it was the flagship. Okay, so it was a missile cruiser. It had a crew of... Let's see, what was its crew size? Okay, it had a big crew. Okay, I stand corrected. It actually had like 500 people on it. So, okay, so that was a thing. Kira mentions Azov. I like to call Azov the Bad Optics Brigade. As the once intimidating Russian army beat a humiliating retreat, the sly and for Putin infuriating bombing of his fancy bridge to Crimea. Like, what an F-slur. Who writes like this? Like, this... I might have to do the Valley Girl voice for this after all. As the once intimidating Russian army beat a humiliating retreat, the sly and for Putin infuriating bombing of his fancy bridge to Crimea, it began. Like, okay, they attacked a bridge. Like, okay. But if we fast forward, Ukraine's counteroffensive last summer was a damn squib. Maybe that's some British term. For months on end, every inch of liberated territory has been gained through huge loss of life and munitions. The Russians are dug in, their confiscated eastern regions heavily fortified. The battle lines have barely moved for months. The conflict's visuals now recollect the meat-grinding Western Front of World War I. Our plot has stalled. There is a middle bit of a novel where nothing appreciable happens for long enough. The reader is apt to put the book down. Like, once again, some people have said that I've, like, actually not that many people, but you could argue that, like, the UCU and this stuff is me making fun of, like, profound human suffering, that I'm making fun of, like, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian men who are dying, defending their country, and all the others who are going to be crippled for the rest of their lives. I do this in part because I have a dark, twisted sense of humor, sure, but also just to mock F-slurs like this. Like, this, I don't even think he's trying to be ironic or satirical or make fun of anything. I think this is how this dude actually, like, views the world, and it's really fucked. Like, it's really fucked. Okay, subject the so that the counteroffensive would subject the Ukrainians to plenty of nail-biting adversity, but Zelensky would finally triumph, regaining all his nation's occupied territory, including Crimea. Ukraine's anguishing self-defense is not a novel, but we're quietly losing interest in this conflict. I include myself because it's not satisfying our fictional appetites. What? Like, is the Ukraine cinematic universe? I'm gonna have to take that as a screen cap for the thumbnail for this. Losing interest because it's not satisfying our fictional appetites. Like, imagine thinking about the world this way. These are the kind of people who are like, oh well, Armenia is not interesting, so we don't care about Armenia. Fuck Armenia. Nagorno-Karabakh doesn't look good on a bumper sticker. It doesn't look good on a movie poster. So screw the Armenian people. Like, it's fucked. Like, I don't really know what else to say about it. Recall that about a year ago, I worried here that our narrative expectations of this war may be taking us into the realm of fantasy. I observed glumly that the war's probable resolution is an ugly moral compromise that sacrifices a goodly chunk of a sovereign nation to a monomaniacal bully who will doubtlessly spin Ukrainian concessions as a dazzling military success, one that redeems for the Russian people's unprovoked aggression and the many deaths of their sons, fathers, and brothers. Because it was completely unprovoked, guys. Expanding NATO to Russia's borders, that was not provocation. I mean, you can say, like, it was justified because it was a breakaway region, but Ukraine has been shelling civilian targets in Donbass for, like, the last 10 years. Like, it's kind of funny because even now that they're out of artillery ammunition, they still have enough artillery ammunition to just fire at a Donetsk city, like, just purely out of spite. Like, they don't have enough artillery ammunition, like, for military, but they have enough of it just to throw at, like, random civilians in Donbass, the area that they're allegedly trying to liberate. Okay, dazzling military success. But once again, he's like, so he's subjecting Putin to the same logic. He's saying because Putin doesn't view the world as a Marvel movie, he's wrong. Because, like, because Putin didn't win a victory like the Avengers did in Avengers Endgame, that means he actually lost, because Putin is coping for the fact that he believes that the world is like a movie, and he's trying to pretend that the world isn't a movie. Think I got that one right. Like, once again, if people want to fact check me, like, please do. I was watching some stuff the other day, and they were talking about how, like, the Net City and Belgorod are still getting attacked. Like, didn't the Ukrainians launch a bunch of missiles at Belgorod, and they just hit, like, basically nothing? It wasn't even a military target. It was just purely out of spite. And I mean, sure, you can say the Russians do that too, but we're trying to say that this is not a moral equivalent conflict. The end game is more likely than ever. This end game is more likely than ever. I'm not happy about that. In fact, it makes me sick. But the average age of the Ukrainian army is now 43. A statistic that makes me even sicker, but you're writing an article about how you don't give a shit about it. They're running out of young men, not because the young men won't serve, but because they're dead. Well, I mean, that's a lot of them fled the country. From my understanding, the Ukrainian urban middle class has largely been able to bribe their way out of it, and most of the soldiers have been taken from rural areas, particularly from Russian-speaking areas that are still under control of the Kiev government, and thrown into the butcher, thrown into the meat grinder. That's what I was trying to say. So, just a side note on the okay, because so the Russia is using North Korean weapons. I don't really. Maybe someone could explain to me why. It like what the significance of Russia using North Korean weapons are. Like, I guess you could interpret it as them being out of weapons. They could also just be like, look, North Korea is selling these weapons for cheap. I mean, what's better than 1 million shells? 2 million shells. Like, I don't really get why it's an act of desperation to buy more weapons than you need so you have extra firepower. Like, I don't really get that. Isn't having like a couple extra million artillery shells better than not having a couple extra million? I don't know. Maybe I'm not big brained enough. I guess maybe it's because North Korea is widely despised. I mean, I don't like North Korea either. I'm just saying from a purely pragmatic standpoint, I don't really get it. Okay, but no, the men don't want to serve in the war because, and we've talked about this, and this was an article from the BBC. This was not an article from Russia Today. NATO trainers were saying that they were giving Ukrainian men 3 days of training and then throwing them into like the front lines. They didn't even know how to reload their rifles. That's why they don't want to serve in the fucking army. I mean, the whole situation is a disaster to begin with, but like, they clearly don't give a shit about their soldiers. You still have that, I forget where it is, if someone can maybe remind me, that area in Kherson, I think it's Kherson, where they have a foothold on like the right bank of the Dnieper, and they refuse to give it up, and they like keep sending more dudes over there, and the Russians just blow the guys up, then they send more dudes over. They can't get mechanized units across it. They don't have landing ships. It's like they're just there like as a PR stunt so we can have like another Ukrainian cinematic universe movie. It's really fucked. Ukrainian women are being sent to the front lines. I thought that was Russian propaganda. I thought that was Russian propaganda, that women were being sent to the front lines. Also, it's not very progressive of him to complain about this. I mean, I do find it's always is funny, and I know that every conservative makes this point, but how like it's suddenly an issue for women serving in the military once they actually have to fight. With his legacy and political future on the line, Putin is clearly all in for the long haul. The easily manipulated Russian public have not rebelled. Once again, this is something very common to Western liberals, is they cannot comprehend that someone might have a different worldview. Like, he can't understand that the Russian public might think that this is based. Like, they might go, well, we want Russia to be great again. We see the Ukrainians as part of our nation. I mean, you don't have to agree with that. You don't have to agree with other people's worldview to understand that they have a different worldview. That in the worldview of the Russian people, they view the 1990s as a period of total humiliation where the U.S. just shit on them, and they want to become a great power again. And you can like them or hate them, but by any objective metric, Russia is far better off after 20 years of Putin's rule. Crime is way down, living standards are up, poverty's down, alcoholism is down, abortions are down. By pretty much every objective measurement, it's better. Oh, Ninebreaker. I can answer the question. It's because our military always ordered to have more ammo in stock than already sent to the front lines. We use NK ammo to have at least 50% in reserve. Okay. Thank you, Ninebreaker. Okay, well, that's pretty much what I thought it was. I mean, that just seems reasonable. Like I said, why not have 2 million shells instead of 1 million? Given the reduced... Okay. Russia had nearly 4 times the population of Ukraine before the war. Given the reduced population in Kiev-controlled areas, the countries are now mismatched in manpower by a factor of 5. Russia's GDP has increased since last year. Those sanctions really worked. Keep in mind, guys, Russia is isolated. I'm gonna say, and like people say, I just shill for Russia all the time. I thought the sanctions were gonna do a lot more damage to Russia than they did. I thought Russia's economy was going to go into recession. I thought they were going to have a critical shortage of certain stuff and things like that. I was not expecting them to weather the storm as well as they did, at least not as quickly as they did. But I guess the reality is, the U.S. isn't the only country in the world. Europe isn't the only trading bloc in the world. I mean, Russia has lots of other friends. India has been Russia's friend since independence. They're on good terms with China. At the moment, they have good relations with all of the Arab states, some South American countries. Africa, they get along pretty well with. So they still have a majority of the world's population who will trade with them. It's also not as if Russia doesn't have industry. I mean, you can say a lot of things about the Soviet Union, and I do, but the Soviets were pretty good when it came to technology and engineering and science. They weren't always very good at applying it on a wide scale the same way the U.S. was. The U.S. was definitely better at kind of implementing it to the masses, but the Russians made computers, the Russians built spaceships, the Russians invented all kinds of stuff. They invented much better air defense missiles. So the idea that Russia is incapable of building anything, that they are capable of having their own industry was just. But I never expected it to go as well as it had. I'm actually kind of surprised by it. Let's see. Okay, the ruble started rising against the dollar. Western sanctions have failed. Now, something I see a lot in these various places is they will say the sanctions failed, but we need more sanctions. Now, what's about to happen? I'm sorry if we're doing a side note. The current thing that they're going to do is fucking crazy. So they froze $300 billion of Russia's central bank assets, and I think private individual assets in the West. So that's been frozen. So the Americans are hinting that on the 2-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, they're going to seize the $300 billion and give it to Ukraine. It's such a bad idea. And I don't care if this is you're pro-Russia, if you're anti-Russia, if you're pro-Ukraine, if you're anti-Ukraine, if you think Putin is the Antichrist. This is just a bad idea. What country in the world would want to put their money in the Western financial system after this. They aren't even at war with Russia. Like, it would be one thing, like, if they seized Nazi Germany's assets during World War II while they were at war with them. But they're not at war with Russia. They're just stealing, basically, state property and giving it to a third party, and they're going to try to justify it by saying it's reparations or something like that. Like, it's crazy. It's crazy. It's going to be a disaster. Even if you support funding Ukraine, and even if you, once again, you think Putin is the Antichrist, this is going to have really, really bad implications. It's interesting because a lot of I think it's like a dozen or something like that. I might be exaggerating. It was like 6 to 12 Nobel Prize winning economists have said, look, guys, this is a really bad idea. I think like the Financial Times said it was a bad idea. The Economists, I think, said it was a bad idea. Like hardcore neocon publications are saying this is a really bad idea. I don't share the view of many Republicans that Ukraine should be thrown under a bus because the country is none of our business and should spend taxpayers' money on solutions to our own problems. Like the people in Hawaii, they didn't get like how much did they give Ukraine? Like $100 billion? The people of Hawaii didn't get $100 billion. Let me see. What is the population of Hawaii? Okay, so the population of Hawaii is 1.42 million. So they could have given each person like $100,000 or something like that if they just distributed it. Sorry, I'm bad at doing math on the fly, but they could have basically just rebuilt everybody's house in Hawaii who lost it for the same amount of money. But no, that money has to go to Ukraine. Yeah, so as Donovan points out, what makes countries want to invest, and this is so the reason why, in part, what we would consider liberal democracies tend to be fairly financially successful, is in a lot of them we have rule of law, we have enforcement of contracts, and we have rights like a right to not have your property illegally seized. And if you're having to choose between a country that has rule of law, where the government is not there's corruption in the U.S., but nothing like what you see in Africa, where the public service is not particularly corrupt, where you don't have to deal with like rampant violence and civil wars and stuff like that. That's where you'd want to like put up your business, right? Even if it's slightly more expensive, being able to have your business in a country where they're not going to just grab your shit for no reason. There's not going to be a coup next week, and you're not going to have to pay somebody off like hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a permit. And I know some of that stuff happens in the U.S., but let's be real. It's nothing compared to the kind of stuff you see in Africa or even in Eastern Europe. And they're going to throw that away. Like, once again, if you want to fight Russia, fight Russia. But the cost that the U.S. and the West will have to pay if they seize this money will be way more than whatever it would have cost if they had have just done it themselves. Sorry, I had to talk about that because I wasn't sure if I was going to make a separate video. But just because the conflict's resolution has major geopolitical ramifications doesn't mean we can write our own happy ending. No matter how much ordnance the U.S. and NATO ship to Zelensky, we're not providing the soldiers obliged to wield it. I say this with a heavy heart if the writing is on the wall. If a negotiated settlement that cedes captured territory to Putin looks inevitable, maybe it's time to urge the Zelensky government to enter talks to bring this depressing war to its depressing conclusion. So I was thinking the other day, so a lot of people shit on Nazi Germany for not surrendering. They're like, why didn't they surrender after D-Day? Why didn't they surrender after Stalingrad? And Nazi Germany expected far harsher like, sorry, let me just, um, completely lost my train of thought there. Oh, sorry, Nazi Germany could expect far harsher terms than whatever Ukraine will face. Because ultimately, what will probably happen is the Ukrainian territories will be annexed into Russia. They'll probably suppress the Ukrainian language and Ukrainian culture, at least somewhat. But ultimately, I think that the opinion of Russia is the Ukrainians aren't second class citizens, they're just Russian citizens. So is that cultural genocide? Maybe. But I don't think the Russians have any interest um, in massacring the Ukrainians, in turning Ukraine into like a shithole. I mean, if we look at the areas they've captured, I think Mariupol has already been like they're rebuilding it. Like Russians are buying oceanside property like crazy. They're building highways. They're repairing it. If Russia takes it over, it's going to become a Russian province, and they will spend the money necessary to develop it as a Russian province. If anything, they'll spend more money on it than some other parts of the country because they want to show off. Now, that is what Ukraine has to hope for. Is it the best case scenario? No, but it's not like what Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany was rightly afraid that the Soviets would do to them what they did to the Soviets. That the Soviets would just go in there and just like just go in there and slaughter everybody, mass rape their women, split Germany into oh wait that happened into different pieces. Like what they had to expect was much worse than what Ukraine has to expect. Okay, so somebody is saying 46% of students in Russian-controlled Zaporozhye received their education Ukrainian. I can't verify that. If that's true, then cool. I personally think that if parents want their kids to be bilingual, by all means, they should have a right to have their instruction in both Ukrainian and Russian. I mean, they have to. I think they have to learn Russian because that's the state language. But I don't really see anything wrong with it being bilingual. Maybe that's just because I'm from Canada and that's just kind of the way it is. Um, so, but, and then there's the case of Japan. Like, Japan, part of the reason Japan didn't surrender sooner is because the Japanese thought that the Americans were going to do to them what the Japanese did to people who surrendered. Now, you can say what you want about World War II, but the Japanese did truly horrific shit in China. I mean, you have the 3-all policy, burn all, steal all, kill all. You had the burn to ash strategy. You had the rape of Nanking. You had all kinds of insane stuff that happened. And the Japanese expected that the Americans were going to do the same thing. They were going to treat their prisoners of war the way that the Japanese had treated American prisoners of war with the Bataan Death March. From my understanding, and maybe somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, MacArthur is fondly remembered in Japan for not doing that, for not like raping everybody and like just completely destroying the country. We can talk about the liberal constitution some other time, but I'm just saying the standards people have when countries should surrender are much lower than the ones for Ukraine. And if it had been at the beginning of this conflict, and I'll talk about it again, my understanding is that the Istanbul Accords, or was it the Istanbul Accords or the Minsk Agreement? But the deal was Donetsk and Luhansk would become autonomous provinces of Ukraine with self-rule. Crimea would be accepted as part of Russia. Ukraine would be allowed to keep a reduced army and join the EU, but would have to change its constitution to say it would never join NATO. And my understanding is that was what the original terms were. Would Russia have abided by those in long term? I don't know. But it would have at least gotten them out of Ukraine, and it would have given them some room to try to do that. So, Repulse. Yeah, I agree. I think the unconditional surrender was really Giesler. I'm not gonna like. I think that was like I really dislike that. I'm just saying that. Okay, so dragging out an entrenched stalemate merely racks up a higher body count and destroys more Ukrainian homes and infrastructure to no purpose. Sitting back and giving the Ukrainians just enough weaponry to keep fighting to the last man and women, only for their country to finally end up where we always knew of, is not just immoral, it's murder. Was that the rest of the article? I guess that was the whole article. So, basically, it's over, guys. Like, we've been saying for... And once again, like... And I did a previous video about this, where I said that, like, Biden would not... Like, that Biden would not... okay, sorry. So the Republicans said, we will give you the money from Ukraine, but you have to secure the border and you have to give us a plan. And Biden was like, no, I can't tell you where this like $80 billion is being spent. It's just, you're just going to have to trust the plan. You're going to have to trust the plan that the money is going to go to the right place. We don't need to budget it. We don't need to do an audit. We don't need to check where any of this money went. We just got to trust the plan. And they're like, can we secure the border? And they're like, no. Now, in Biden and his supporters' minds, Putin is Hitler reborn. Putin is going to kill every last Ukrainian. He's going to invade the Baltic states and enslave them. He's going to invade Poland. He's going to invade Germany. He's behind Hamas and ISIS. That was the other one we heard. That Putin is basically the Antichrist. And in Biden's moral calculation, he would rather allow all that stuff to happen than secure the border. And in like this dude's moral calculation, split in half allowance to join EU, no on NATO, 100,000 troops military max. That's what some people in our military circles think it would be considered victory. What do you mean by split in half? Did you maybe clarify that? Like, was half of the country supposed to go to Russia? Like, honestly, it doesn't sound like that bad a deal. And this is kind of the issue, like, with Finland. I think it was a mistake for Finland to join NATO, because I think Finland had a pretty good thing going, where it was a democracy that had good relations with Russia, so they could kind of be a middleman. They could play both sides. I think they were in a pretty good like position, kind of like what Yugoslavia was doing during the Cold War, where they could trade with both sides and they could kind of make some money as the middleman. I don't think Finland joining NATO really helps it at all. Besides that, I think both sides, in the event of a war, don't want to go through Finland. Nobody wants to be fighting in Scandinavia and going to Norway and Sweden. Okay. Okay, if the request was the eastern half of the country to go to Russia, then I can see why they refused. My understanding was it was just Crimea was the only thing that Russia was going to directly annex. But if that's the case, then I understand more why. But joining, yeah. Because I think that they were okay with it, joining the EU, just not NATO. And I mean, once again, it's like, sorry about like doing a what if the situations were reversed. But if Mexico was going to join the Warsaw Pact, like, America wouldn't settle for that. Like, they didn't settle for Grenada. They didn't settle for Nicaragua. They didn't settle for any of that stuff in their backyard. So, and I think it's important to keep in mind that reality and morals are not exactly the same thing. So even if you want to say, Argent, there's no moral equivalency between Russia and America, Russia's evil, America's good, it's okay for America to expand NATO because NATO is morally correct. and it's not okay for the Soviet Union to expand to Mexico because the Soviet Union's evil. That's beside the point that I'm trying to make here. The point I'm trying to make is that in the minds of the Russian people, in the minds of the Russian government, that is how they see it. Um, they see this as their enemy basically trying to surround them and to try to attack their sphere of influence. And there's like the whole shit about the rules based international order and all that stuff. As I've said many times, and maybe Ninebreaker, you're Russian, you can agree with me or disagree with me. I feel very strongly that if after the Soviet Union dissolved, America had have reached out a hand to Russia and helped them to their feet and helped them rebuild their economy and modernize and stuff like that and welcomed them into the community of nations, I think that would have led to like eternal good feelings and we wouldn't be in this mess. But instead, they decided to gloat. And then color revolution all the pro-Russian countries and give weapons to the Chechens and other people. It's sad. I'm not a pacifist by any means, but like the way that things are going at the moment, where world leaders are not even talking to each other anymore, is fucking scary. Like, let's just think about this for a minute. Even during the Cold War, you had the danger phone. You had at least some communication between the different parties. Now there's no communication. Like, the Russians and Americans aren't talking to each other. Like, it's scary. Like, once again, regardless of what side you're on, the fact that like you have nuclear powers. Okay, Ninebreaker says after 1991, we just wanted to live in peace with West. Finally, U.S. did everything to destroy our trust and make sure all our propaganda was right. That's how we see this. And once again, even if you think that that is delusional on his part, the point is that is what the Russian people think. And yeah. What is this obsession with hating Russians? Is it genuine Russophobia or boomer LARP? I think people can't differentiate between the Soviet Union and the modern state of Russia. Now, as I've said many times, I'm very anti-communist. I think NATO was in the right during the Cold War. I support a lot of the stuff the U.S. did, like in Vietnam and in Korea. I think killing communists in Latin America was based. I'm staunchly anti-communist, but like the Soviet Union's gone. It's not around anymore. They aren't pursuing global revolution anymore. Like it's just not like a thing anymore. And BoomerCons, like I think they talked about the Red Army. Like I think one of them called it the Red Army. They're like the Red Army got defeated, and they talk about like how the KGB still exists and stuff like that. And they're pretending that like this is the 1980s or 1970s, and stuff like that. But it's not. Like it's Russia is a different country now. So it's to me, and I've said this many, many, many times. I view international relations like this. You at least try to sit down and have a conversation. What was that song Russians love their children's too? You see if you can find any kind of common ground that you can like coexist in peace. If not, you have a strong military. Like I don't have an issue with America having a strong military. If you're a great power, you should have one. You should have the ability to project power, but it's just retarded. And now we're getting into like the Nikki Haley. Ninebreaker says we overthrew our communist government themselves, and the U.S. is still not pleased. What the hell do they want? That's an opinion from regular citizen. Yeah, so like Ninebreaker, I like the Russian people. I don't like communism. But then again, I'm Canadian and I don't like the shit libs that run my country. So it's just like sometimes you gotta move on. Now, something that Russia does do, and I think they were kind of pushed into it a bit, but it does irritate me, is the whole like third worldism, anti colonialism thing. I think is pretty cringe, to be honest. Now, I get that they kind of got driven out of the West category, so they have to start like appealing to that. I understand that logically speaking, but I still find it very cringy. Um, it's not as bad though as like China, I guess. Well, no, it's more understandable for China, but China, I think, is like a much bigger snake than the Russians are. I would much rather trust the Russians than I would trust uh, the Chinese. I think Nixon made a mistake when he opened up China, but I know we're supposed to say China's base nationalist government now, but it's I don't know. I don't like China. Maybe I keep empathizing that because I don't want people to think I'm like a third worldist or something like that. Or like you have like Brian Berletic, who I watch his show, but he's so often like just panders. He's like, oh well, America's this racist country and it's like white supremacist and stuff like that. It's just like it's just cringe. But I don't know. I just wish we could have lived together in peace. But apparently that's not the case. And even with like Iran, like does Iran have to be the mortal enemy of America? Does like does Iran have to uh does Iran have to yeah, Berletic, he made my worst take list for that. By the way, so when I say I dislike China, I mean the communist government. I think the country got a lot worse, obviously, after the commies took power. Um, I have quite a bit of fondness for the Chinese Empire, uh, the various Chinese states. Uh, but U.S. surely chose its friends better. Yeah, I don't know. Like, why would you trust Mao? That's a good question. Why would anyone trust Mao? But and like once again, I'm not even like a pacifist. Like, okay, if we ignore for the fact that the U.S. probably created ISIS, I thought it was based when we killed ISIS members. I thought that was based. I thought that was good. I think like of all the wars that the U.S. has done since the end of the Cold War, that was like one of the few ones I could get behind. Um, Although then we decided to go after Assad, even it's I don't know. Yeah, America does its own third worldism. Like I'm not saying that they don't. I'm just saying Russia does that too. Um, like I'll give Trump credit for if for nothing else, and people shit on him for this. They like shit on him for talking to North Korea, and I'm like, why wouldn't you talk to North Korea? Like they're like you're legitimizing them by talking to them. Like you you can hate North, and I don't like North Korea. I think North Korea is a deeply evil society. But what's to be lost by sitting down and trying to diffuse the situation? If you have to whack them, you have to whack them. But you can at least try to come to some sort of agreement. And I mean, to Trump's credit, did the thing get resolved? No. But they started talking at least. There was something regarding progress. Like, to his credit, I don't know. I like a lot of people in these circles love North Korea, and they think North Korea is base. North Korea, my primary concern is in a lot of the world is how Christians are treated, and my understanding in North Korea is Christians are treated horrendously by the government. Also, it's just an evil place, and it's communist. And I get that it's like base nationalistic communism, but it's just I don't know. Uh, but anyways, so that's my thoughts on the matter. Once again, these people are fucked. Like it's just like I don't want to hear about the Ukraine war anymore. So we're gonna have to um, just completely abandon Ukraine to like genocide, abandon the world to nuclear war, because Putin is evil. Like Linebreaker says, personally, I don't like North Korea, but the enemy of my enemy is our temporary ally. U.S. did this shit themselves. I mean, yeah, like once again, it's why wouldn't you buy weapons from North Korea? Like if you're Russia, they're willing to sell them to you at a good price. Like you buy them. Um, the U.S. buys oil from Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia has done way more harm to the world uh, than like North Korea. Like Korea. If we want to talk about countries that have done the most damage to the world, I think Saudi Arabia is number one. Saudi Arabia has done more damage to the world than I think, maybe probably even the U.S. Because the U.S. at least fought communism, but Saudi Arabia used its oil wealth to just massively send like radical Wahhabists, clerics all throughout the world, and radicalized Islamic populations. In many cases, that from my understanding, a lot of the Muslims in the Balkans, the some parts of the Caucasus and Indonesia were fairly laid back. That a lot of like places where the Muslims were fairly like chill, they just threw a hand grenade on it, like they threw a Molotov on it. Because like keep in mind, Wahhabit. Okay, so liberals like to and conservatives like to do the ISIS isn't real Islam thing, Al Qaeda isn't real Islam thing. There's a certain amount of truth to it. Wahhabism is like this weird desert cult. It's like this puritanical form of Islam that other Muslims hated. Like, keep in mind, the Ottomans invaded Saudi Arabia. Well, I was called Najad at the time, but they invaded the area multiple times because everybody hated the Wahhabis. Everyone thought that they were just massive, like, losers. I mean, for one thing, like, why would you want to kill infidels when you can keep them alive and tax them? Like, I think that's the thing. It's like, well, I mean, it's good to have a large infidel population because we can make them pay jizya, and then the Muslims don't have to work as hard. Like that is, I think, traditionally kind of how it worked. Is it's something Tiberius said. Tiberius said, uh, it's bet you have to shear the sheep but not skin them. If you are too brutal with the people you're robbing, then they can't give you anything else. It's killing the goose that laid the golden egg out of greed. They funded Chechen terrorists, by the way. Saudi Arabia and Qatar is where all their leaders fled after the second campaign that crushed their plans of separating Caucasus. Yeah, and I think it's so. I think like Russia getting Saudi Arabia and Iran to join the BRICS was a big diplomatic W, but you are playing with fire if you have anything to do with Saudi Arabia. The Saudis are like the biggest snakes. The Saudis are massive fucking snakes. They've snaked America. They've snaked pretty much everybody. you don't want to do business with them. You just don't. I'm going to wrap it up, but just an interesting side note, and maybe if someone wants to speak to this in the chat, is History Legends had a Canadian intelligence officer who served in Afghanistan on. So his take was that the Taliban, the reason the Taliban are like what they are, isn't because of Islam. Like, it's not that they're Islamic fundamentalists. It's that they're like redneck Pashtuns, and that like they're just a savage mountain people, and that a lot of this, that their actual interpretation of Islam isn't even that radical, because they aren't Wahhabists. I thought they were Wahhabists for a long time, but they're not. I don't even think that the school that they follow is particularly known for it. It's just that they're that's just kind of how Pashtun culture works. He had it on Patreon. If you go to History Legends Patreon, he has it there. I pay for his Patreon because I think he makes really good quality content, and the stuff he does on his he does interviews that are really good. So I'd recommend subscribing to his Patreon. He's had Brian Berletic on, which is pretty good. He had Weeb Union on, and kind of some other people. But yeah, definitely check out History Legends channel. He's just very, I think, like, he's just very honest. His review of Napoleon was really good. He just kind of calls it as he sees it. But anyways, I just like to say thank you, everybody, for watching. God bless. Please have a good weekend, everybody. And the words of the late, the great Red Green, keep your